Christiana Amanpour, the Persian-speaking correspondent, is not making such claims, though she might later on, if once she gets back to Atlanta, the home office of CNN, and is forced to do so by by the executives at CNN, Ted Turner in particular, who's an ardent Zionist. I can just see him screaming into his gold-plated telephone, "We need chaos! Show the people chaos! I don't care what it takes." But anyways, um, the claim that this is similar to the 1979 revolution is a grave insult to the Iranian people and to all fair-minded people around the world. This lie is so pathetic and so blatant and so just ridiculous that it really isn't even worth reproaching. But we must, because of the overwhelming propaganda that CNN is engaged in at the behest of its Zionist executives. Let us remember that during the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, upwards of 20 million people were on the streets at given times. The crowds that showed up to receive Imam Khomeini rahmatullah alayhi when he returned from exile was dubbed the largest crowd in history by an incredulous Western reporter who said that Western audiences cannot comprehend the massive scale of what is happening. During the brutal repression by the Shah as he desperately clung to power, upwards of 20,000 unarmed people were gunned down in the streets of Tehran. There were rivers of blood flowing down the streets of Tehran. They were gunned down, mowed down with automatic weapons and by helicopter gunships. How dare these gutless, shameless, slandering, adulterous, shameless journalists compare what is happening in Iran today to what happened in 1979. Another interesting point to prove this is that CNN breathlessly reported that two Iranians who had just arrived at an airport in the U.S. were terrified of what had happened in Iran. One of them had broken a thumb. She had broken a thumb. Now, how stupid does CNN think its readers are? First, let's look at the obvious. What kind of brutal, suppressive regime lets those who protest against it glibly fly back and forth between it and an openly hostile, the U.S. regime? Isn't the fact that these ladies, if they exist at all, were able to fly unhindered, unimpeded, and without harassment to the U.S. after participating in protests against Ahmadinejad, how is it that they were able to fly back to the U.S. with a broken thumb? Oh, the travesty of it. They broke a thumb. She broke a thumb. What is going on? Why is it that while the U.S. president is openly undermining the Iranian political system, we have proof of how free Iranian society is? CNN must really think its readers are stupid, and this brings us to line number 5. But before we get to line number 5, another point that needs to be made is of how CNN doesn't tell us how free Iranian society is. There was a point here that I wanted to make as an addendum to line number 4, but I'll get to it later. Line number 5. CNN seems to cover the story as if it's the most important thing happening now. What is the latest CNN headline? Hundreds, of course they've been forced to say hundreds now because they'll look really stupid if they continue to say tens of thousands. Hundreds protest in Iran. The CNN front page headline screams out. Apparently, a few hundred people protesting in a country of close to 70 million is worth front page headlines to CNN. It doesn't matter that 2 Washington, D.C. metro trains crashed and 6 people died in that same time. This apparently is not front page news for CNN. 6 of its own citizens dying. Who cares? Hundreds of protesters are protesting in Iran. That's what matters to CNN. Add to this the fact that one of the dead was an Air Force colonel who was responsible for the scrambling of jets on September 11, 2001. Even this so-called war hero is irrelevant to CNN, and his death is not covered. He's not profiled. But a woman who tragically dies in Iran is profiled, of course. In the meantime, over 100 people have died in Iraq in the past 3 days. Suicide bombers have struck in Russia. India has declared a large portion of its own population terrorist in Assam. The UN has declared that a major pandemic is underway that could threaten the world. But good old CNN, with its dreams of seeing a free Iran, and is taking its orders from its Zionist masters sitting in their boardrooms and executive suites demanding more Iran news, can't get enough of sensational Iran news. Well, at the very least, CNN should take a clue from its own audience. Let's see. Front page on CNN, hundreds of protests in Iran. Meanwhile, when I last checked, What are the top 10 most read stories on CNN? Iran doesn't even break the top 10. At number 1 is Reality Bites for John and Katie. It's a reality show. Don't ask me. I don't know. At number 10 is Cancer Trials Get Good Results. But does CNN care that cancer could be potentially cured? No. Iran. Focus on Iran. I can hear a livid Ted Turner, who is avidly pro-Israel, screaming this into his gold-plated telephone. What are the top 10 most email stories on CNN? Number 10 is the analysis by that dimwit, Fareed Zakaria, that Iran has been dealt a fatal wound. I think a fatal wound has been dealt to that Apu, Desi-sounding Fareed Zakaria and his dimwit, liberal, booze-guzzling friends at the Times and CNN. Let's see what the top 10 let's see what the top 4 of the top 10 are. Number 1, Rihanna. She's important. Chris Brown. Number 2, he's the most viewed story on CNN. Kaylee Anthony, that little girl who disappeared, who was brutally murdered. Who cares about her? CNN is concerned with a few hundred protesters in Iran. AIG is number 4. Hey, CNN, remember that economic meltdown your country is in right now? How about reporting on that for once? Let's see what the top 10 most researched or searched stories on CNN are. At number 1 is the story about that poor woman in England who was trampled by a herd of cows. At number 10 is China.